Good evening, night owls. That's how I always start these late night shifts. It's my way of letting you know you're not alone out there. Whether you're working the graveyard shift, driving through endless stretches of dark highway, or lying awake because sleep just doesn't come easy anymore, I'm here. The station's signal crackles a bit tonight, but that's nothing new. If you've been tuning in long enough, you know this frequency likes to misbehave after midnight. Some say it's the weather messing with the towers. Others blame the hills outside town. Me? I think it's just the way radio works. A ghost in the wires whispering between the songs. Speaking of, we've got some classic tracks lined up for the next hour, plus the usual rundown of traffic snarls, weather shifts, and maybe a story or two if the phones stay quiet. So lean back, turn the dial just a touch to the right to clear up that static, and stay with me until the sky starts to lighten. But before we dive into all that, let me check the emergency weather feed. Something's been flickering on my monitor all night. Probably nothing. Still, you never know what the sea might cough up when the tides pull wrong. All right, let's see what the world's up to tonight. First off, for anyone heading toward the docks, there's been a minor pileup near the old ferry terminal. A few fender benders. Nothing serious. Though, if you're planning to pick someone up, maybe give it a little time. Weather's shaping up to be strange. I'm seeing conflicting reports. Radar's showing clear skies, but coastal stations are reporting sudden fog rolling in off the water. Not unusual this time of year, but something about the way the temperature's dropping has a few of the older captains spooked. And speaking of the sea, looks like the local fishing fleet had a rough evening. One or two vessels returned early, blaming sonar malfunctions. One skipper said his instruments picked up something big beneath his hull, bigger than any whale should be this close to shore. You know how sailors are. Give them too much coffee and not enough sleep, and they'll turn a school of tuna into a kraken. Still, I'll keep an ear on the marine bands. Anyway, if you've got stories to share, maybe you saw something strange out on the water tonight, or just want to vent about your boss. The lines are open. We've got time before the next track, and you know I love a good fishtail. Hang tight. Phone's already blinking. Looks like we've got a caller who wants to weigh in on the weather. Let's see what they have to say. You're live on the air. What's your name, and what's got you up this late? Yeah, this is Pete. I'm calling from the Blue Horizon, out near the shelf. We just got back in, but I'm not sure we should have. All right, Pete, what happened out there? We lost power about 30 minutes after sunset. Sonar went haywire. Depth gauge started spitting out nonsense, like we were hundreds of meters deeper than we should have been. Technical issues? Or something more? That's the thing. The water. It started glowing. Real faint at first, like plankton bloom, but then brighter. Deep green, almost blue. And something passed under us. Something huge. We felt the current shift, like the whole sea was breathing. You're not the first to mention strange readings tonight. Could be thermal vents acting up again. Remember that scare last year? This wasn't vents. This was alive. The line crackles, his voice thinning under the weight of whatever silence surrounds him. We heard it. Through the hull. Like metal bending. But deeper. Like something thinking. The call drops. Static eats the last word. I sit there, fingers hovering over the console, heart pounding in my chest. All right, maybe it's nothing. Maybe Pete's had one too many out there on the water. But maybe, just maybe, the sea has finally started whispering back. I wanted to move on. Talk about the next round of weather, maybe play a track to lighten the mood. But the phones kept lighting up. Not just from locals. This time, it was boat crews offshore. Shipping operators from neighboring states, even a sonar technician working the late shift at a monitoring station 2 counties over. Their voices all carried the same tightness, that thin, metallic strain people get when they're trying not to panic. The same word kept slipping through. Missing. Boats vanishing mid-transmission. No distress calls, just sudden silence. One caller, a sonar tech named Harris, sounded like he was whispering from the edge of a nightmare. His instruments were picking up something, but no one knew what. Not a wreck, not weather interference, not a submarine. The signal was alive, shifting, breathing, moving deeper, then closer again. And then came the images. Blurry, distorted footage leaked onto social media by a research drone operator. The feed showed something organic. Folds of tissue, a single pale slit that could have been an eye or a wound, framed by what might have been teeth. The images disappeared minutes later, wiped from every platform, but not before a few night owls caught screenshots. I tried to keep my voice steady as I relayed what I knew, but my hands were shaking. I was supposed to keep the show running, to anchor this little island of normalcy, but it felt like the sea itself was watching, and the water, for the first time, was watching back. I was halfway through telling listeners to stay off the water when the broadcast cut out. Not a technical glitch, a full override. The emergency alert tone kicked in, that bone-deep shriek that leaves your nerves vibrating, even after it stops. It blared longer than usual, just sitting there like a warning with no instructions. And when it finally faded, a voice I didn't recognize came through. It wasn't live. It was a pre-recorded government message, but something about it sounded wrong. The cadence was off, clipped like whoever wrote it didn't actually expect anyone to hear it. This is a regional emergency broadcast. All vessels are advised to return to port. Coastal residents should avoid shoreline access until further notice. Unidentified biological activity has been detected in offshore waters. Please await further instruction. That was it. No official signature, no agency name, just biological activity. A phrase too clinical for something this big. The phones went wild after that. Callers begging for answers, asking if the Navy was involved, if this was terrorism, if they needed to evacuate. I didn't know what to tell them. My job was to calm them down, to keep them company through the static, but my mind kept going back to that sonar tech's voice and the image on that drone feed, the pale eyes staring up through the black. Before I could say another word, the alert sound kicked in again. This time, the message never came. The emergency alert had barely faded when the first reports started flooding in, not from my usual late-night callers. These came directly through the station's emergency line, the one we almost never use. Portside neighborhoods had gone dark, whole city blocks along the coastline losing power at the same time, like something flipped a switch beneath the sea. Backup grids failed one after the other, leaving only flickers of light from generators that couldn't hold for long. I pulled in reports from neighboring stations. It wasn't just us. Cities up and down the coast were vanishing into silence. Emergency towers sputtering to life, only to collapse again under the strain of frantic calls and corrupted signals. All I could hear through the emergency feed was static. Not the kind you get from bad weather or faulty equipment, but a thicker, almost wet static, like sound trying to push through water. Some broadcasts broke through, brief bursts of prayers, shouts, breaking glass, the deep groan of metal warping under pressure. Then they'd cut out again, swallowed whole. I told myself it was a grid failure, a cascading outage triggered by storms or equipment failure. But something in that static felt wrong, like there was something underneath it. A low vibration too deep for the human ear, but heavy enough to feel behind the ribs. And just as I tried to explain it to my listeners, that hum surged through my own broadcast, a pulse from somewhere offshore, louder than the signal we were sending out. Whatever was happening out there wasn't just crashing into the cities, it was listening. The emergency channel broke open all at once. Not a steady stream of updates, but a violent storm of sound. layered calls over call, each voice clawing for space in the static. Civilians screaming from apartment rooftops, desperate for helicopters that weren't coming. Fishermen shouting prayers in languages I couldn't even place, their words garbled, as if the air itself was bending around them. Somewhere in the middle of it, I caught the clipped metallic edge of a military transmission. They were trying to evacuate critical zones, but every time their team crossed into the blackout perimeter, the signal shredded apart. Not jammed, but pulled under by some other frequency moving through the water. Calls kept cutting off mid-sentence. No gunfire, no explosions. Just this horrible silence, like something opened its mouth and swallowed the sound whole. A woman called in, her voice tight with fear, asking if I could hear something breathing beneath the static. At first I thought she was hallucinating, but then I heard it too. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't a scream. It was a breath, slow and deliberate, pulling in air and water and signal alike. Like the sea itself had lungs, and it had finally decided to exhale. And before I could calm her down, the line went dead, replaced by a sound I still don't have words for. Something wet, something ancient, something too big to fit inside any story I've ever told. Eyewitness calls flooded in next, shaky voices, terrified breathing, people describing things no one should be able to describe. A man from a crumbling watchtower said the harbor was glowing, not from lights, but from something moving beneath the surface, a vast bioluminescent shape pulsing in and out of sight. Another caller, voice shaking so hard I could barely understand him, said he saw a shape rising, its surface covered in what looked like tendrils, or fingers or ribs, but none of it fit together right. Like every part of it belonged to something else, stitched into one impossible body. And then came the tidal wave. Not a surge, not a breaker, but a wall of water pushed outward by something too big to stay hidden anymore. Buildings crumbled under the pressure. Fishing boats snapped like twigs. And at the center of it all, something opened its eyes, and the water shone with unnatural light. The callers tried to explain, tentacles, mouths, ridges the size of highways. But every description dissolved into terror, and every voice cut out in the same place, as if something was cutting off the signal the moment they saw too much. I sat there, fingers hovering over the console, heart hammering, wondering if the next voice I heard would even be human. After the eyewitness calls, I did what any sane broadcaster would do. I reached out to the experts. We're a coastal town, so I had a list ready. Oceanographers, marine biologists, even a guy who used to run the sonar arrays for offshore drilling companies. People who should know the difference between folklore and fact. They came on one by one, each voice carrying that professional calm scientists like to use when the public gets jittery. The first few speculated about thermal vents, rogue currents, maybe an undiscovered deep sea species forced to the surface by shifting tectonic plates. They sounded confident at first, the kind of confidence you get when you think nature still plays by rules you understand. But the confidence didn't last, because as they were explaining bioluminescence and pressure adaptations, new reports came in. Things science didn't cover. Creatures that shouldn't exist. Moving in patterns that suggested intention, not instinct. Ships weren't just capsizing. They were being dragged down, their distress beacons blinking out precisely at the same depth. One scientist, a geologist with 30 years of fieldwork, started to explain something about ancient fault lines running into submerged caverns when his phone cut out mid-sentence. When I tried to call him back, the number rang to a disconnected tone. The next expert lasted 5 minutes before he admitted it. He had no explanation. Whatever this was, it didn't fit the models. It wasn't behaving like an animal or a current or even a natural disaster. It was responding to something. By the end of the hour, the experts had fallen silent, leaving only the listeners, me, to figure out what came next. That's when the line rang again, not the usual studio line, the emergency maritime channel, the one I'm not even supposed to touch unless the Coast Guard clears it first. But I answered, because how could I not? The voice was barely human beneath the static. A fisherman, lost somewhere beyond the radar line, voice shaking so badly his words slipped sideways. He'd lost his crew. The boat was listing, but it wasn't the sea doing it. He said there was something under the hull, something pressing up from beneath with impossible weight. The planks groaned like teeth grinding, and the water glowed brighter with every passing second. Then he said it. The eye. A single colossal eye, opened beneath the boat, staring straight through the keel. Like the creature wasn't just looking at the boat, it was looking at him. He didn't scream until the last moment. One long, ragged howl that cut off with a splash. Then the line went dead. I didn't even have time to process what I'd heard before the email came in. No subject, no sender, just a file attachment labeled with nothing but a date. July 2nd, 1951. I opened it live on air. It wasn't a report, it was a transcript recorded from this very frequency more than 70 years ago. An intercepted transmission between a deep sea expedition and an unnamed government agency, describing the same sounds, the same lights beneath the water, the same missing ships. At the bottom of the file was a single handwritten note, scanned in from yellowed paper. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, and it said, "They are listening to us." I read it aloud, not fully understanding what it meant. Not yet. But as the static rose again in my headphones, I realized the hum behind it had changed. Like something out there had started listening back. The phones haven't stopped ringing. Not with the usual calls, no song requests, no lonely truckers looking for conversation. This time, the voices on the other end all sound the same. Frightened, breathless, trembling under the weight of something they can't explain. They're seeing things, not out their windows, but inside their heads. A woman from 3 towns over says every time she closes her eyes, she's standing on the deck of a sinking ship. Salt water burning her lungs, though she's never even set foot on a boat. A teenage boy whispers into the line, his voice shaking, telling me he knows what the creatures want, though he can't remember how he knows. One caller, voice hollow with exhaustion, says the static itself is whispering to her, not in words, but in images she can't escape. The eye beneath the water. The hand made of bones and coral, the mouth that never closes. Every single story ties back to the creatures. It's like the line between seeing and remembering has broken, and somehow, the further the kaiju rise, the deeper they sink into our minds. I keep telling myself it's fear, collective panic, feeding off the silence, but I can feel it too, just at the edge of thought. Something leaning closer, listening. Testing if it can push through. And I'm terrified it already has. That's when the official voice broke in. One of those government spokespersons with the sterile calm you hear during hurricane warnings, reassuring us everything is under control. There are no airborne toxins, they say. No biological contamination spreading inland. There is no evidence of shared hallucinations, and anyone claiming otherwise should seek psychological counseling. But the phones keep ringing, and every single person describes the same visions, the same whispers curling through the static. Even people hundreds of miles apart see the same thing. Something enormous unfolding beneath the ocean, a body too big to fit inside the Earth's skin. One man calls from an isolated cabin nowhere near the coast, saying he dreamed of drowning in the glow of that impossible eye, and when he woke up, his window was wet from the inside. I play the government statement twice, hoping the repetition will make it sound more believable. It doesn't. The calm voice, the denials, it all sounds too pre-written, like someone planned to say these exact words long before tonight. But if they knew, why didn't they warn us? The phone lights flicker again, and this time, the voice on the line is a child, asking me if I can hear the sea breathing inside the walls. The shift happens quietly at first. Listeners calling in, saying they've locked their doors, not because the government told them to. No official evacuation order ever came. They just felt it. A father tells me his kids have pushed all the furniture against the windows, even though they live miles from the nearest shore. A grandmother describes her family huddled around an old radio, turning the volume up as loud as it will go. Not to drown out the silence, but because they need my voice to prove the world outside still exists. The radio has become a lifeline, not just for updates, but as a ward against the things pressing in from the dark. I can hear it in the way they breathe when I speak, like every word I say is holding back the tide. One man, a retired fisherman who swears he's seen every storm this coast can throw, breaks down on air, confessing that the sky doesn't look right anymore. The clouds move like water, and the moon looks too close, too pale, like it's been watching this whole time. He asks me if sound can hold back what's coming. I want to lie to him, to say yes, to promise that as long as I'm talking, nothing can reach them. But outside my own window, the static has changed again. It hums like breath in my ears. And when I pause too long, I swear I can hear something breathing back. I want to tell these families they're safe. I want to tell them they're imagining things. But every time I open my mouth, the only thing I can think to say is, Guri, stay tuned. I've always been good at keeping my cool on air. That's the job. You hold the line between the audience and the storm. No matter how bad things get, you stay steady so they have something to hold on to. But tonight, I can't hold the line. My hands are shaking against the console. My voice keeps cracking between words. Every time I close my eyes to catch my breath, I see it. That eye beneath the water, staring through me like it knows my name. I start talking faster than I should, filling every gap with noise because silence feels dangerous now. Silence feels like an invitation. I tell stories that go nowhere, spinning tales about storms I never lived through, fishing trips I never took, anything to stop thinking about the hum in the static and the way it's shifting to match the rhythm of my own breathing. I want to believe I'm imagining it, that I'm just sleep deprived and rattled by the callers, but I can feel it pressing against my voice, like the signal itself is carrying something else inside it, something that's listening through me, and maybe speaking through me too. My listeners can hear the cracks. They're calling in to ask if I'm okay, and every time I reassure them, my voice sounds less like mine. I hear myself saying things I don't remember thinking. Fragments of warnings, broken coordinates, pieces of old distress calls, all pouring out like they've been waiting inside me, using my mouth to escape. I've stopped being their anchor. I've become another transmission they can't turn off. And part of me wonders, when they hear me now, are they even hearing me? Or is it something else speaking through me? The line crackles again. A new voice comes through, whisper thin, barely holding itself together. It's a man, maybe mid-30s. And I can hear the weight of everything pressing down on him in every breath. He's alone. His power's out. The windows have gone dark, and the only light left in his house comes from the glow of his old transistor radio. He says the sea is inside his head now. He can feel the water rising behind his eyes, and every time the static hums, it gets harder to remember which thoughts are his and which belong to the deep. He doesn't ask for help. He just asks me to stay with him, to be a voice in the dark while he decides if he wants to keep breathing. I try to stop him. I tell him to hold on. That morning will come. that the world always finds its way back to solid ground. But before I can finish, I hear the click of a gun being cocked, followed by a single final breath. And then nothing. Just static. And somewhere inside that static, I swear I hear the sea exhale. I don't have time to process the silence before the next call comes in. But this time, it's not from a listener. The voice is old, thin, and soaked with salt, like someone who spent their whole life breathing seawater instead of air. He doesn't introduce himself. He doesn't need to. There's something in his voice that feels familiar, like I've been waiting for him to call. He says this isn't the first time this has happened. There was another expedition, decades ago, that heard the same hum, saw the same lights beneath the trench, and sent out warnings that were buried under classified seals and redacted files. He tells me the sea has a memory. And every time humanity reaches too deep, it remembers the last time we knocked on the door. And this time, it's knocking back. Before the line cuts out, he leaves me with one last sentence, a whisper so soft I almost miss it. They're not rising from the deep. They've been here all along, and they've been listening to us for years. Then the line dies. For the first time all night, I realize the static isn't just noise anymore. It's breathing. The moment the old researcher's line went dead, the government stepped in. Not subtly, not with carefully worded statements. They flooded every open frequency at once. Emergency bands, maritime signals, even hijacking my own broadcast for a full minute. At first, they stuck to the script, tremors offshore, minor geological disturbances, a temporary communications failure caused by weather interference. It was the kind of bland reassurance you could almost believe if you hadn't just spent the last 2 hours talking to people who'd seen the sea open its eyes. Then the tone shifted. No more talk of quakes. They called it anomalous biological presence, like that phrase meant anything. No names, no descriptions. Just 3 sterile words delivered in the flattest voice imaginable, as if reducing it to dry vocabulary could shrink the terror into something manageable. But the calls kept coming. People on the coast weren't reporting biology. They were reporting giant hands, pulling ships apart, mouths opening wider than streets, something breathing in tandem with the waves themselves. And the government spokespeople, they heard it too. Their voices started to crack. Their scripted calm slipped just long enough for me to catch it. They were afraid. That's when I realized the truth. They weren't denying the monsters existed. They were denying how long they'd known. This wasn't a discovery. This was a failure to hide what was already there. And somewhere, beneath the confusion, beneath the crackling static, I could hear it again. The hum rising through the frequency, like it belonged here more than I ever did. The next message came in sharper, laced with authority, but no real control. Martial law was in effect along every coastal city within 200 miles of the continental shelf. Evacuate immediately, they said. Seek higher ground, if possible. Avoid direct contact with seawater. But by the time those words reached me, it was already too late. Families called in from flooded streets, water rising faster than they could run. One voice, a mother with her kids trapped in a second-floor apartment, begged me to tell her which direction was safe. North? Inland? I didn't have an answer, because every choice led back to the sea. The monsters weren't staying offshore. They were following the water wherever it went. Then came the stories that made no sense at all. People vanishing from dry ground, dragged down by nothing anyone could see. Evacuation convoys disappearing mid-transmission, leaving only static behind. And even the people who made it inland, they still heard the sea, even if they couldn't see it. Martial law meant nothing to the water, nothing to whatever was rising through it. And the louder the government shouted, the clearer it became that they weren't issuing orders to protect anyone. They were screaming into the dark, hoping something else was listening. and I couldn't tell if they wanted it to stop or if they were waiting for a response. That's when the military feeds collapsed. Not all at once, but piece by piece, like something was peeling back the layers of their transmissions, listening to every word before deciding what got through. Emergency dispatches cut off mid-sentence, replaced by wet, heavy static. The same sound I'd been hearing in my own feed. It filled the gaps like the sea itself was answering, swallowing each broken message and leaving behind a breath too deep and too slow to be human. Then came the corrupted transmissions. Voices folded over themselves, commands played backwards and forwards at the same time, like the signal was being bent underwater. I heard distress calls stitched into weather reports, emergency frequencies playing half-drowned songs, and somewhere in the middle of it all, something knocking on the edges of the broadcast, as if the ocean itself wanted in. Listeners called in to ask if I was doing it, if the station had been hacked, or if I was playing some kind of hoax. I wanted to tell them the truth. I wanted to say that I didn't touch the board, but my hands were shaking too hard to press the buttons, and underneath all of it, I could still hear that hum. Not in the headphones, in my bones. That's when I realized it wasn't just us listening to the monsters. The monsters were listening back. Want me to continue directly into the hacker broadcast and classified leak sections? This is where the conspiracy deepens and we start peeling back the government's buried secrets. Shall I keep going? The military feeds were still crumbling when my own broadcast was hijacked. At first, I thought it was another government override, another sterile voice reading pre-approved lies. But this time, it wasn't official. The station speakers filled with a glitching chorus, voices overlapping in bursts of static, like 1,000 people speaking at once, but none of them in sync. Then came the message, not from the government, but from a hacker collective calling themselves Abyss Protocol. They spoke directly into my feed, bypassing every firewall the station had. Not just breaking in, but taking control like they'd been waiting for this moment. They didn't waste time with introductions. They started dumping files straight into the feed, reading aloud from classified reports buried under 70 years of silence. Deep sea expeditions from 1948, 1951, 1959, all reporting contact with massive biological anomalies, creatures too large to be contained by known science. Every expedition was scrubbed from public record. Their crews reported lost in accidents that never made the news. But the recordings survived, distorted sonar readings that sounded less like echoes and more like language. Early radio signals that came back changed, and first-hand accounts of crew members driven mad by the sound itself. The hackers didn't just expose the cover-up. They made it clear the government didn't just discover the creatures tonight. They've been communicating with them for decades, quietly, carefully, and when that communication broke down, when we went too deep, pushed too far, the creatures answered back. The hackers' final message was clear. They're not invading. They're replying. Then the feed cut out, and my voice returned, trembling over airwaves that no longer belonged to me. The phones exploded after that. Every conspiracy theorist within range of my frequency came out of hiding, each with their own piece of the puzzle, and none of them sounded as crazy as they would have yesterday. Some swore this all tied back to deep sea drilling projects from the 1970s, exploratory rigs that drilled too far and woke something up. Others pointed to classified Cold War bioweapon programs, experiments meant to terraform the ocean floor into something more useful, only to discover it was already occupied. Religious callers joined in too. Coastal shamans, deep sea cultists, old voices who'd been warning about this for generations. They said the kaiju weren't monsters. They were the ocean's immune system, triggered every time humanity broke the ancient covenant between land and sea. The conspiracies didn't clash. They wove together, one feeding the next until a chilling picture formed. We didn't discover the kaiju, we summoned them. We knocked, they answered, and now they remember us. I tried to dismiss it, to ground the broadcast back in facts. But how could I when the truth was already bleeding through the static? That's when I received the transmission. Not from a caller, not from a hacker, but a direct intercept from a military frequency they thought was private. It was short. No codes, no operational chatter. Just a single order, spoken in the flattest, most terrified voice I've ever heard. Do not engage. They're listening to us too. The weight of that sentence settled like lead in my throat. The monsters weren't just hearing us through sonar, they were hearing us through the broadcast themselves, through my voice, through yours. Every word we said fed into the signal, and the signal flowed straight into the sea. We didn't just wake them up. We gave them a window into our minds. Every warning, every evacuation order, every panicked scream, over the airwaves, the kaiju heard it all. And the more we broadcasted, the faster they found us. I sat there, pulse pounding, knowing full well the microphone was still live. My words weren't just reaching you. They were reaching something else too. And I had no way of knowing who was listening harder. My audience, or the deep. After the military transmission faded, I did the only thing I could. I opened the phones again. This time, I wasn't looking for eyewitness accounts or panicked confessions. I wanted answers, and for the first time all night, the scientists were eager to talk. Marine biologists, oceanographers, climate researchers, they all called in at once, their voices layered over one another in a frantic argument no one could win. Some insisted this was a freak ecological event triggered by undersea earthquakes or methane releases. Nature throwing a tantrum, nothing more. Others argued it was a planetary immune response, the ocean purging itself of human interference, treating our ships and rigs and signals like an infection. But a few of them, the ones who had seen too much, went darker. They didn't talk about quakes or pollution or changing currents. They said this felt deliberate, like the creatures were reacting to something humanity had done, some ancient line crossed so long ago. We'd forgotten. But they hadn't. One scientist, her voice trembling under her calm facade, admitted she'd seen the old files. Deep sea expeditions sealed under layers of clearance. Crews that heard the hum before any disturbance was detected. Scientists who reported feeling watched through their sonar screens before they vanished completely. As they argued, something else became clear. None of them agreed what the creatures were, but they all agreed on one thing. They weren't new. Whatever was rising had been here longer than us, waiting below the threshold of discovery. And somehow we called them up. Not just with drilling or pollution or noise, but with something older than technology, something embedded in the human voice itself. And when the experts had nothing left to explain, the old voices stepped in. The next voice belonged to an elder from a coastal tribe, one whose ancestors had lived by the water long before maps carved names into it. He didn't argue with the scientists. He didn't need to. His story was older than theirs, and it knew how this would end. He spoke of the sleeping leviathans, ancient beings folded into the seabed itself, wrapped in silence and pressure so heavy it held back memory. These weren't monsters, he said. They were keepers of the boundary, watching the line between what belonged to the land and what belonged to the deep. For centuries, the line held. Even when storms came, even when ships disappeared, the balance remained until the first wireless signals spilled from our radios into the sea. He said the voices carried too far, brushing the edges of places meant to stay dark, and the leviathans opened one eye. That's when the first dreams started. Long before tonight, fishermen seeing shapes moving beneath their boats, children waking up, gasping for air they hadn't breathed in water. But humanity didn't listen. We built bigger transmitters, sent stronger signals, until the boundary shattered completely. The elder's voice grew quieter as he spoke, like the weight of the story itself was pressing on his chest. He said the creatures weren't attacking us. They were answering a call. Not from the scientists, not from the military, but from every human voice that ever reached into the water. And the scariest part wasn't that they were awake. The scariest part was that they knew our language now. As his voice faded, the phone line crackled, and through the static, I could swear I heard a second voice, older than the elders, whispering the same story back to me. The scientists were still arguing when the first religious callers broke through. Not just local priests or radio evangelists, these voices came from all over. Some from small towns along the coast, others from inland churches, and a few from places whose names didn't show up on any map I could find. They didn't argue about science or tectonic shifts. They called the kaiju what they really believed they were: divine punishment. Not a freak of nature, not an accident, but a reckoning long prophesied, one humanity brought down upon itself by daring to touch the edges of creation. A preacher from Louisiana said his congregation dreamed of the sea swallowing the sky. Weeks before tonight, an elder from an isolated monastery whispered about the return of the voice beneath the waters, a warning carved into stone centuries before the first ship ever crossed the Pacific. And then a caller, an archivist for a forgotten sect, read from an ancient prophecy. The words matched too perfectly: the hum in the air, the glowing tide, the sky turning to water, and finally, the voice speaking from the deep directly into human minds. The prophecy didn't name the creatures. It only called them the rememberers, beings who kept the record of every trespass humanity ever made against the sea, waiting for the day we finally spoke loud enough to wake them up. The scientists laughed it off at first, until one of them, a marine historian, recognized the prophecy's exact phrasing from a classified Cold War sonar incident report. When faith and science finally agreed on something, I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach, because it meant this wasn't random. It was a conversation, and the next voice might not be ours. Before I could even process what that meant, the knock came at the studio door. The courier didn't speak. He just left a package addressed directly to me, not to the station, not to my producer, to me personally, though I didn't recognize the handwriting. Inside was a reel-to-reel tape, stained with salt water, wrapped in a file folder marked Mariana Trench, unredacted copy. The sender's name was handwritten across the top: Dr. Eleanor Shin, a researcher who vanished during a deep sea expedition in 1987. I threaded the tape onto the player live on air. Because after everything tonight, how could I not? The tape hissed like something breathing through broken teeth before her voice came through. She was terrified, but calm. The kind of calm people get when they know they're already dead. She described sounds recorded 7 miles down, sounds no human should have heard. Rhythms in the water, not currents, not whale song, but patterns that matched ancient chants carved into deep sea cave walls. Sounds that spoke first, long before human sonar ever touched them. She ended with a warning, one her expedition ignored: if you speak to the deep long enough, the deep learns how to speak back. The tape cut off, replaced by the hum, louder than ever. No distortion this time, no static, just a voice underneath it, speaking a word I couldn't understand. But somehow, I knew it was my name. I didn't want to play the tape. Every instinct told me to leave it alone, to keep it sealed, to pretend it never arrived. But how do you ignore something that followed you to your doorstep, something sent not to the station, but directly to me? So I played it live. It started with low-frequency pulses, slow and deliberate, each one hanging in the air like a heartbeat too large to belong to anything human. Then came the metallic scraping, not sharp, but deep, like something enormous dragging itself along the ocean floor, leaving trenches no map could record. But it was the final sound that broke me. It wasn't a noise, it was a voice. Not words exactly, but a shape made from sound. Rhythmic, repeating, and too deliberate to be natural. It didn't sound human, but it didn't sound entirely alien either. And then the calls started. Listeners flooded the lines, some panicked, some too calm, all describing the same thing. A pressure inside their skulls, like their inner ear was being pulled inward, like the sound wasn't just being heard. It was changing the space inside their heads. One caller swore they could understand it, even though there were no words. Another said it felt like a memory being overwritten, as though something deep and cold was rewriting what they thought they knew about the world. I cut the tape off mid-loop, but it didn't matter. The hum didn't stop. It was inside the broadcast now, folded into the silence between my words, settling into the space where breath should be. I asked if anyone else could still hear it. Every single caller said yes. That's when a familiar voice rang through the emergency line. A deep sea linguist I'd interviewed years ago about whale communication. She sounded out of breath, like she'd been running, or maybe like she knew time was running out. She'd been listening to the recording off air, analyzing it, trying to break down the patterns inside the noise. And what she found wasn't a message. It wasn't a warning. It was a countdown. The pulses, the rhythm, the way each burst of sound shortened after the last. It followed a sequence, one that ended not in hours or minutes, but in distance. The creatures weren't just emerging randomly. They were moving towards something. Inland. She said the countdown wasn't a clock. It was a map, tracing their movement step by step. And if her calculations were right, they would reach land before dawn. But the part that stopped me cold, the part that made my hands shake so badly I could barely hold the mic, was what she said next. She said the countdown started before the first kaiju ever breached the surface. The creatures weren't responding to what we saw. They were responding to what we said, our broadcasts, our words, every distress call, every sonar ping, every story we told each other about what waited in the dark. It all became part of the signal. We weren't reporting on the kaiju. We were leading them here. The calls have slowed, not because the panic is easing, but because there's no one left to call. The main emergency lines are dead. Television stations went dark hours ago. Even the Coast Guard's frequency, which has been a constant hum in my ear since I took this job, has collapsed into nothing but silence and static. Whatever's happening out there isn't just taking people, it's taking the systems that tie us together. As far as I can tell, this station is one of the last voices left on the air. Every other transmitter along the coast is either flooded, destroyed, or caught in some kind of signal distortion, so thick it sounds like the ocean itself is trying to speak through their feeds. I thought being the last voice standing would make me feel important. It doesn't. It makes me feel like I'm standing on a rooftop during a flood, screaming into the wind while the water keeps rising. And it's not just here. The calls that do get through are from further and further away. Sway people on emergency radios hundreds of miles inland, hearing our broadcast crackling through channels that shouldn't even reach that far. Something about the air itself has changed, carrying my voice farther than it ever should travel. It's like the world knows we're running out of time, like the atmosphere itself is stretching my voice as far as it can go, trying to keep humanity stitched together by one fragile thread of sound. I'm not broadcasting for the town anymore. I'm not even broadcasting for the country. Right now, this signal might be the only thing tying the last survivors together, and I have no idea how long that thread will hold. Because somewhere beneath the hum, beneath the static, I swear I hear something else broadcasting too. Something rising through the same frequency, listening every time I take a breath. I didn't ask for this. I signed up to fill the dead hours, to play old songs for night drivers and talk lonely callers through their insomnia. I was supposed to be a distraction, not a witness, not a historian for the end of the world. But now I'm realizing something terrifying. This broadcast, this might be the last human voice anyone hears, not just tonight, ever. Every word I say matters now. It isn't just passing time or filling silence. Every syllable is being braided into the story of what happened here. When this ends and someone or something digs through the static to figure out how humanity fell, this is the tape they'll find. I don't know how to carry that weight. I don't know how to fit the end of the world into sentences small enough to say out loud, but I have to try. Because if the only thing left of us is silence, then it's over before it ends. I've stopped reading the weather, stopped taking calls. I'm just talking now, filling the air with everything I can think to say. Those stories about my childhood, memories of the first time I saw the ocean, the way salt air burns when you breathe it too deep. Anything to prove that we were here, that we were real, that we had voices once. And maybe, just maybe, if I keep speaking long enough, someone else will answer. Maybe there's another voice out there sitting alone at the end of some forgotten frequency, waiting to know they're not the only one left. Because that's all any of us really want, isn't it? To know we aren't alone. So if you're still listening, if this voice is reaching you somehow, even through all this static and blood, you're not alone. Not yet. The phones are still working somehow. Every line pulses like a heartbeat too fast to control. And I answer because what else can I do? The voices on the other end come from the edges of survival, the last corners where the water hasn't swallowed the ground. One caller, a woman trapped in a storm-battered bunker with her family, says the concrete walls are sweating brine, salt dripping from places that should be dry. The air itself feels thick, like she's breathing underwater, even though the door is sealed shut. Another call, a deckhand stranded on a sinking fishing trawler, comes through, so broken I can barely piece the words together. He describes the deck tilting beneath his feet, the glow beneath the hull pulsing like a heartbeat, and something enormous rising through the water, its outline blocking the stars. Before the call cuts out, he asked me to say his name one last time, so someone, anyone, will remember he existed. Then there's the man on a rooftop, surrounded by floodwaters that shouldn't have reached that far inland. He says the water talks when the wind dies, whispering his secrets back to him, things no one else could know. He begs me to keep talking, to drown out the voice in the water with the sound of another human being. Every story is a eulogy for a world that isn't dead yet, but knows it's dying. These aren't updates anymore. They're confessions, fragments of life spilled into the airwaves before the sea swallows the last of the land. And I write none of them down because there's no one left to report to. Every voice that breaks through the static knows the truth, whether they say it or not. We've crossed the line between warning and obituary. The broadcast isn't just telling people what's coming. It's a memorial for the world they used to know. I keep talking to fill the silence between the calls, but my eyes won't leave the window. I haven't described what I see yet, because saying it out loud feels like crossing a line I can't uncross. But you deserve to know. If this is the last thing I ever broadcast, you need to know what's standing out there. There's something rising through the mist, too large to fit into any shape my brain can hold. It's not just big, it's wrong. A silhouette that bends the air around it, a shape the sky itself can't decide how to hold. Its edges shimmer like heat off pavement, but the air has gone cold enough to bite. The size alone leaves me breathless, but that isn't what terrifies me. It's the feeling, the weight pressing down against the walls, like the whole station is a seashell, caught in its grip. And every word I speak vibrates directly into its bones. I know it hears me. I know this broadcast isn't just a human voice reaching human ears. The creature, or creatures, are part of the frequency now, riding the signal like a current through water, flowing from me to you and back again. I'm no longer reporting on them. I'm speaking to them. And even though they don't have mouths, at least not the kind I understand, I swear I see the shadow starting to smile. I've been working at this station for years, long enough to know its quirks, its broken dials, the hiss in the signal that comes and goes with the wind. But what I found buried in the emergency archive, I swear it wasn't there before tonight. It was a recording, unlabeled, except for a timestamp that didn't make sense. Dated nearly 40 years before I ever sat behind this mic. The file was sealed under an old emergency frequency protocol, one reserved for national crisis broadcasts. I didn't even know the system could hold files that old. I played it live, because by now, you know me. I'm not leaving anything hidden. If the world's ending, we're facing it together. The recording crackled to life with that same emergency alert tone we've heard all night. Shrill and endless. That sound that scrapes at your spine like teeth on metal. Then, beneath the static, a voice, a radio host reading a warning nearly word for word, identical to the one I gave you hours ago. Stay off the water, avoid shorelines. They are awake. They are moving inland. They are listening. The tone, the phrasing. It was like someone had been watching my broadcast before it even happened, copying my exact cadence and fears. But the date on the file, June 2nd, 1985, that was before the kaiju were even a rumor, before this station even covered marine reports. And the further the message went, the worse it got. The voice started breaking apart, fear leaking into every syllable, until the broadcast dissolved into a panicked plea. If you hear this, you still have time. But not much. They follow the sound. They follow the voices. The more you talk, the faster they come. I stopped the recording, heart hammering, finger shaking, and that's when I saw it. The file had one more piece of data attached, a signature ID embedded in the metadata. The system always tags emergency broadcasts with the ID of the person who recorded them. It was my name. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even breathe. My name, my voice, my warning, from decades before I was even born. I played the file again, listening closer this time, hearing the cracks in the voice, the age in it, the trembling under the words. It was me. Older, worn down, voice thin and stretched like it had spent years trying to warn people who wouldn't listen. I don't know how to explain that. Time doesn't work like that. At least it didn't until tonight. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. The kaiju aren't bound by time the way we are. They've been here so long, resting at the bottom of the world, that they don't measure time in days or years. They measure it in signal. Every frequency we ever sent into the deep, folded into the water, carrying fragments of our voices across not just space, but time. And somehow, some version of me, a voice from a future that was swallowed before it could happen, reached back, trying to warn us before it was too late. And now, that future is here. The loop has closed. My voice led me to this moment, and this moment will lead me to whatever comes next. Whether that's survival or the final silence after the static fades. I don't know how much time we have left, but I know this. They aren't just listening anymore. They are answering. And if you can still hear me, wherever you are, however far this signal carries, you are part of this now too. Stay with me, please. Because when my voice finally breaks, I need to know someone else is still listening. The hum is louder now, no longer underneath my voice, inside it, threading through every word like my breath has been braided into something much older, much deeper than lungs or airwaves could ever hold. The calls have stopped. I don't know if it's because there's no one left to call, or if they're still out there, listening in silence, afraid that if they make a sound, the sea will remember their names too. Outside, the shadow is closer than the horizon, close enough that when the wind shifts, I can hear it breathing through the through the walls, not roaring, not screaming, just breathing, slow and endless, the way something breathes when it's never needed to stop. I used to think the end would be loud, explosions, sirens screaming, but now I know the truth. It ends in silence, when there's nothing left to say, nothing left to explain, because the ocean already knows everything we've done. I can feel the pressure building in my chest, like the air has thickened into water, like every breath I take is pulling the tide deeper into my lungs. And through it all, the static keeps speaking, too quiet for words, but too deliberate to be noise. It's learning, adapting, becoming language. I can't tell where my voice ends and the broadcast begins anymore. Every word I speak loops back into the hum, feeding the signal like blood into veins. I've stopped being a host. I'm just a conduit, a speaker pressed against the ear of something too big to name. This station was never just a station. It was a beacon, and my voice was never mine alone. It's part of the water now, part of the signal the kaiju have been following since the first word ever crawled across the sea. I don't know if anyone is still listening, but if you are, if this voice is reaching you, wherever you are, you are not alone. Not yet. Because the moment this broadcast ends, the silence won't belong to us anymore. It will belong to them. And if you can still hear me, even after the static eats this signal whole, remember this. They always listen, even in silence, especially in silence. This was your host signing off. This frequency is about to go silent, but silence doesn't mean nothing is listening. If you've followed this broadcast all the way through, if you've felt the hum behind my words or caught yourself holding your breath during the pauses, you're part of this now. You've heard what they've heard. And I have to ask you something, a question no one's ever answered, maybe because no one survived long enough to even ask it. When the water remembers a voice, does it ever forget? Maybe the kaiju aren't monsters at all. Maybe they're memory itself. The ocean's way of keeping records no human was ever meant to read. Every distress call, every prayer whispered over a dying radio, every scream swallowed by static. It all settles into the seabed like sediment until memory itself wakes up and comes looking for the ones who tried to forget. So, tell me, if the ocean remembers every word ever spoken into it, what do you think it remembers about us? Leave your answer in the comments. Maybe together we can figure out what the water really wants. If you want to hear more broadcasts like this, more stories of forgotten warnings, impossible memories, and the things waiting just beneath the surface, subscribe before this signal disappears. And if you care about someone, really care, send them this broadcast, because memories deserve to be shared, not lost. This was your host, signing off, or maybe signing in.